Okay, so today I want to talk about the FiiO SR11 because I think the SR11 is 2025's best value network streamer. And its utility has really grown on me since using it in my K11 R2R DAC review.
This episode is brought to you by Bowers Wilkins, makers of the PI8 True Wireless IEM. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
Now you can see how the SR11 shares the K11's chassis, but unlike the K11, the SR11 is USB powered and therefore there is no bulky power brick with this streamer, unless of course you count the little USB brick. Now the SR11 sells for roughly €100 in Europe and roughly $100 in the USA, but there's no DAC inside this streamer. We have to add our own. So that means there are only digital outputs on the back panel. This is important for newcomers to know. So we get Toslink, coax, USB for connecting to a separate outboard DAC. And yes, those digital outputs are volume controllable if we want them to be. And yes, there's a cheap plastic remote control thingy in the box for changing the volume from a distance. Did you know that the German word for remote control is Fernbedienung, which means remote or distance servicer or service? Fascinating, right? Now the volume wheel on the SR11's front panel is also used to navigate its internal menu system. But if you find the wheel a bit fiddly to use, as I do, you can always revert to the remote control for menu navigation. Now inside that menu system, we find options to set our preferred digital output. And then we decide if we want that digital output's volume to sit at maximum level or if it should be volume adjustable. So for example, if I connect the SR11 to FiiO's K11 R2R DAC, I set the SR11's volume to maximum and use the K11's volume control. But if I use a USB DAC without a volume control of its own, I make the SR11's volume adjustable. Two USB DACs I've been using with this unit. This is the Campfire audio relay. This does actually have a volume control on it, but obviously you can't remote control that from a distance. And it's the same with this one. This is the Go-Bar Kensei edition from iFi. This has volume control on the side, and it also has sample rate readout on the bottom. And I'll come back to why that's useful in a bit. Now, we can also dim the FiiO's top plate logo and its front panel display inside the menu system, but the front panel display can also be turned off more swiftly with the button to its left. Now the FiiO hooks into our network over Wi-Fi or via Ethernet, and a recent firmware update expanded its streaming inputs from just being AirPlay 1 and Roon Ready to include Bluetooth, DLNA and file playback from a directly connected USB drive. And I think you need the FiiO Connect app to access those files. However, there's no Spotify Connect here, there's no Tidal Connect here. So if you want those, you want the other serious contender at this price point, the Wim Mini. But the Wim Mini isn't Roon Ready as the FiiO is, and it doesn't have an Ethernet input as the FiiO does, and it doesn't put the volume level and incoming sample rate on its front panel as the SR11 does. And the Wim Mini doesn't have a USB output. Remember, the SR11's USB output allows us to use it with a USB DAC. Now that's especially useful if we want to use our smartphone's dongle DAC with the SR11. And yes, the Wim Pro and the Pro Plus are Roon Ready, and yes, they have Ethernet sockets, but they don't have USB outputs. No USB output on the back of the Win Pro Plus. Now you might say, but John, the Raspberry Pi has a USB output, and yeah, that's true. But once you've added a case and a power supply to the Pi, you're easily looking at $100, and you still don't have coax or Toslink. Besides, the Raspberry Pi is better suited to power users who want to choose their OS and its streaming functionality. For beginners, writing an OS to a micro SD card or configuring a digital hat are points of friction. The FiiO SR11 doesn't ask for any of that. It's properly plug and play. And it's plug and play because it has Ethernet, a sample rate display, and a volume controllable USB output. And it's Roon Ready, which at this price point, I think puts it in a field of one. And at $100, I think the FiiO SR11 is the best value entry-level network streamer available right now. Now you might be wondering what Roon Ready is. Well, Roon Ready means we can stream Roon to it without functional quirks or gotchas. It means the SR11 has passed Roon's internal testing processes. That means it will play high-res files properly and well above AirPlay's 48 kHz sample rate ceiling. So iFi's GoBar Kensei, this one, confirms that all streams leaving the SR11's USB socket leave it at the correct sample rate, because I get an LED showing me that on the back of this dongle DAC. And Roon Ready also means the volume level on the FiiO is continuously synchronized with the Roon Remote app. And with a third-party extension, I can use Microsoft Surface Dial, I showed this in a previous video, to control the SR11's volume with Roon. I think that's pretty cool. And I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. So in my setup this week, I have the SR11 and a USB dongle DAC sitting on my coffee table in front of my couch here, and that puts headphone listening within arm's reach. And it's immediately satisfying to be able to swap out dongle DACs for a different flavor if I want to each time that I sit down to listen. But I could just as easily connect the dongle DAC's analog output to an integrated amplifier, and with the right dongle and adapter cable, I could even go with a balanced connection to that integrated amplifier. But this video is not a dongle DAC review. And besides, we don't have to use a dongle DAC here. We could connect the SR11 to something far more luxurious. So it could turn the Grim MU2 into an AirPlay receiver, because I often route my Apple TV's audio to AirPlay devices around this lounge room so that I don't have to put out a long run of Toslink cable. Alternatively, the SR11 could add Roon readiness to the Rotel Mishi Q5 or the Marantz SACD10, both of which have Toslink, coax and USB inputs. But I have another DAC here, it's right in front of me, and its only digital input is USB. And I think this DAC is 2025's best value DAC. My patrons already know about this. So that's where we're going on YouTube next. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe according to your preference. And don't forget to hit us up on Patreon for playlists for every video we've made in the last 5 years. We're now doing Tidal, Qobuz, Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. But if I use a USB DAC that doesn't have an internal, but if I use a USB DAC that has, but if I use a USB DAC that has, but the front panel, and it doesn't have an Ethernet, but once you've added a case and a power supply to the Pi, you're easily looking, and it has Ethernet, a sample, and with the right. But I have another DAC here, it's right in front of me, and it's open. But I have another DAC here,